An infamous serial killer retires from killing and writes award-winning crime novels that tell the story of his own murders, and he leaves a subtle confession within his books. Richard grimly stood at the podium, a humble smile on his face as he accepted yet another award for his latest crime novel, Blood in the Water. The critics called it brutally realistic, disturbingly authentic. They marveled at the chilling details, how effortlessly the author captured the mind of a killer. Of course, Richard had more insight into that world than they'd ever know. Or so he hoped. "I never imagined my little stories would resonate with so many of you," he said, chuckling into the microphone. "But, as they say, write what you know." The crowd erupted in polite laughter, completely unaware of just how true those words were. He'd spent years as the Midnight Butcher, a nickname that had always bothered him. A bit too dramatic for his taste. But now, his knives were tucked away, replaced by a pen. He found fiction much cleaner. Less messy. The transition from blood-soaked basements to literary fame had been surprisingly smooth. After all, writing wasn't that different from killing. You still had to plot everything out carefully, anticipate every twist, make sure each step left an impact. And just like a well-planned murder, a good book left no loose ends. His novels were hailed for their psychological depth. Critics couldn't get enough of how he wrote from the killer's perspective with such ease, such understanding. They were fascinated by the little clues his murderers left, breadcrumbs that only the cleverest detectives could follow. And that was the joke, really. The breadcrumbs were there all right. The books were a confession, but no one ever seemed to catch on. He didn't even bother to hide it much anymore. Blood in the Water practically screamed it, every crime scene lifted from his past, every victim's description eerily similar to someone who'd mysteriously disappeared years ago. His favorite line in the whole novel was one he'd actually said during one of his old projects. "It's not about getting away with it," the killer whispers to the protagonist detective, "it's about making them think you're someone else entirely." He could hardly believe that had slipped past his editor. After the award ceremony, Richard sat at a bar with his agent, Leonard, who was still buzzing with excitement. "You're unstoppable." Leonard beamed, raising a glass. "Another bestseller. Have you ever thought about writing a memoir? I bet your real life is just as fascinating as your fiction." Richard nearly choked on his drink, stifling a laugh. "Oh, I doubt that would sell," he said, voice steady. "People like a little distance from reality, don't you think?" Leonard grinned, nodding. True. You always know how to toe the line just right. All those details, you write like you've been there. It's eerie." Richard smirked. "That's the idea." The truth was, Richard had never intended to retire so early. But something about writing, about shaping the story without having to scrub bloodstains from his shirt, was liberating. The police weren't even looking for him anymore. The last few murders had been blamed on some poor sap in prison, convicted on circumstantial evidence and a crummy defense lawyer. Yet here he was, confessing over and over, and nobody even blinked. He'd always thought that killing was the ultimate power, the final say in someone's life. But this, watching people praise him for the very thing they feared, it was intoxicating in a whole new way. Leonard leaned closer. "So, what's next? Another dark twist in the next book? Maybe a killer who retires," Richard interrupted with a sly smile. "A killer who retires. And writes crime novels." Leonard chuckled. "That's